The American power grid has operated under a singular assumption for more than a century, an assumption so embedded in our national consciousness that questioning it feels almost heretical. When you flip the switch, the lights come on. That assumption has shaped our cities, our commerce, our medical systems, our food distribution networks, and every fundamental aspect of modern civilization. We have built a society that cannot function without constant, uninterrupted electrical power flowing through hundreds of thousands of miles of transmission lines, feeding into homes, hospitals, water treatment facilities, banking systems, and communication networks that collectively sustain the lives of 330 million Americans. But that assumption, forged in an era of abundant energy and consistent infrastructure investment, is fracturing under the weight of compounding pressures that most citizens cannot see and policymakers refuse to adequately address. Across 6 specific states, the convergence of infrastructure decay, extreme weather intensification, population pressures, energy policy conflicts, and systemic vulnerabilities has created conditions where catastrophic grid failure is no longer a hypothetical scenario discussed in emergency management conferences. It is a measurable, statistically probable event that could leave tens of millions of Americans without power for days, weeks, or even months. I need you to stay with me through this entire analysis because understanding the mechanics of grid vulnerability, the specific risk factors concentrated in these 6 states, and the cascading consequences that follow large-scale blackouts will fundamentally change how you prepare your household, your finances, and your family for what energy security analysts are now calling the inevitable blackout wave. When you reach the end of this documentary, I want you to comment below and tell me where you are watching from, your city and your country, because the patterns we are seeing in American grid instability are not isolated to the United States, and understanding how these failures manifest in different regions helps all of us build more resilient communities in an era of increasing infrastructure fragility. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation issued its 2025 summer assessment with language that would have been unthinkable 2 decades ago, identifying unprecedented risk zones across the Midwest, Texas, California, New England, and Gulf Coast regions during peak demand periods, warning that reserve margins, the buffer of excess generating capacity that grid operators rely on to handle unexpected surges in demand or sudden plant outages, have eroded to dangerously thin levels in multiple regions simultaneously. What makes this moment historically significant is not that individual states face grid stress, which has occurred periodically throughout the modern era, but that multiple high-population states are experiencing compounding vulnerabilities at the same time, creating the potential for cascading failures that could trigger regional blackouts affecting economic output equivalent to the entire GDP of nations like South Korea or Canada. Texas stands as the most glaring example of grid vulnerability disguised as energy abundance, a state that produces more electricity than any other in the nation, yet has suffered catastrophic blackouts that killed hundreds of its own citizens and exposed the fragility of isolated infrastructure systems that prioritize political autonomy over engineering resilience. The Electric Reliability Council of Texas, known universally by its acronym ERCOT, manages 90% of the state's power grid through a deliberate design choice that separates Texas from the eastern and western interconnections that link the power systems of every other continental state. This isolation was not an accident of geography or engineering necessity. It was a calculated political decision intended to avoid federal regulatory oversight under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, allowing Texas utilities to operate under state jurisdiction without interstate commerce requirements. That decision, made decades ago during an era when grid reliability seemed assured and extreme weather events were less frequent and less severe, created a structural weakness that Winter Storm Uri exploited with devastating precision in February 2021 when record-breaking cold temperatures overwhelmed under-designed power generation infrastructure across the state. On February 15th, over the course of just 4 hours, 40% of the grid's total generating capacity went offline as natural gas wells froze, coal piles became unusable, wind turbines iced over, and nuclear reactors shut down due to cooling system failures, forcing ERCOT operators to implement rolling blackouts that were supposed to be temporary but instead lasted for days as the grid teetered on the edge of complete systemic collapse. At the height of the catastrophe, more than 52,000 megawatts of generating capacity were offline, equivalent to losing the entire electrical output of countries like Portugal or Greece, and 4.5 million homes and businesses lost power while outside temperatures plunged into single digits and wind chills reached 20 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The human toll of that grid failure exceeded 246 deaths, according to state health department estimates, though independent analyses suggest the actual death toll may have reached as high as 700 when accounting for hypothermia cases, carbon monoxide poisoning from improper indoor heating attempts, vehicle accidents on iced roads, and deaths among medically vulnerable populations who lost power to oxygen concentrators, dialysis equipment, and refrigerated medications. The economic damage exceeded $195 billion in property losses, burst pipes, business interruptions, and agricultural devastation, making it one of the costliest infrastructure failures in American history, surpassing the economic impact of many hurricane landfalls. What the Texas grid collapse revealed was not simply inadequate winterization of power plants, though that was certainly part of the failure, but a deeper systemic problem embedded in the state's energy infrastructure, the interdependence between electricity generation and natural gas production that created a death spiral during the storm. When ERCOT ordered utilities to reduce power demand through rolling blackouts, transmission companies inadvertently cut power to parts of the natural gas supply chain, including processing facilities and pipeline compression stations that required electricity to operate. This meant that natural gas producers could not deliver fuel to power plants at the exact moment when those plants needed maximum fuel supply to meet heating demand, and simultaneously some natural gas wells could not produce at normal levels because freezing conditions and power losses disabled pumping equipment. The grid needed natural gas to generate electricity, but the natural gas system needed electricity to deliver fuel, and when both systems failed simultaneously, the entire infrastructure collapsed into a self-reinforcing cascade that grid operators could not reverse without outside assistance that Texas's isolated grid design made impossible to access quickly because the interstate transmission connections that could have imported emergency power from neighboring states simply did not exist at sufficient capacity. ERCOT leadership claimed during the crisis that the grid had been 4 minutes and 37 seconds away from complete failure, meaning a total blackout across the entire state that would have required a black start procedure, the extraordinarily complex and time-consuming process of restarting a dead power grid from scratch without external power sources. Such a scenario would have left Texas dark for weeks, not days, causing a humanitarian catastrophe on a scale not seen in American peacetime history. In the aftermath, ERCOT leadership was dismissed, Public Utility Commission members resigned under bipartisan political pressure, and the Texas legislature passed weatherization requirements that utilities have been slow to implement comprehensively. But the fundamental structural problem remains unresolved. Texas continues to operate an isolated grid without meaningful interconnection to neighboring systems, the state's explosive population growth continues to drive electricity demand upward, and climate data shows increasing frequency of extreme weather events on both ends of the temperature spectrum. Texas added more than 4 million residents between 2010 and 2020, with the Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio metropolitan areas absorbing most of that growth, and each of those new residents requires electricity for cooling during summers when temperatures routinely exceed 100 degrees and heat indexes approach 120 degrees. The state's electricity demand has grown faster than generation capacity additions, tightening reserve margins to levels that leave little buffer for unexpected plant outages or weather events. And because Texas relies heavily on natural gas for power generation, natural gas fueled 60% of the state's electricity in recent years, any disruption to gas supply or delivery creates immediate grid stress. Texas accounted for 13% of all power outages in the United States during 2023, despite representing less than 9% of the national population, a statistical disparity that reflects ongoing reliability problems 3 years after the Winter Storm Uri disaster supposedly prompted comprehensive grid reforms. Maryland presents a different but equally concerning grid vulnerability profile, one rooted not in infrastructure isolation like Texas, but in aggressive energy policy transitions that have dismantled reliable baseload generation faster than replacement capacity and storage systems could be deployed to maintain grid stability. The state has embarked on the most ambitious renewable energy transition in American history, setting statutory requirements to achieve 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045, while simultaneously decommissioning nuclear plants, retiring coal facilities, and restricting natural gas development through regulatory and environmental litigation. The Dabio Canyon Nuclear Power Plant, California's last remaining nuclear facility producing 9% of the state's electricity and 20% of its carbon-free power, was scheduled for closure until Governor Gavin Newsom reversed course in 2022 amid grid reliability concerns and extended its operating license. That near miss revealed the precariousness of California's energy planning. The state had been preparing to shut down its single largest source of reliable, carbon-free baseload power during a period when electricity demand was rising due to electric vehicle adoption, building electrification mandates, and population growth.
Hurricane Ida, in August 2021, demonstrated the catastrophic vulnerability of Louisiana's grid when the storm made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane with sustained winds of 150 miles per hour and knocked out all 8 transmission lines feeding electricity into New Orleans, leaving the entire city dark and more than 1 million customers across Louisiana without power for periods exceeding 10 days in many areas. The complete loss of transmission into a major American city revealed fundamental weaknesses in grid design and maintenance that Energy Louisiana, the state's dominant utility provider, had failed to address despite repeated warnings from state regulators and reliability experts, who had documented inadequate investment in transmission hardening and vegetation management following Hurricane Gustav in 2008. The transmission line failures during Hurricane Ida were not unpredictable acts of God, but foreseeable consequences of infrastructure neglect, as post-storm investigations revealed that Energy had consistently prioritized shareholder returns and executive compensation over grid resilience investments that would have protected critical transmission corridors from storm damage through structure hardening, tower reinforcement, and strategic undergrounding of vulnerable lines. The economic and human consequences extended far beyond the immediate blackout period, as prolonged power loss during late August heat, with temperatures exceeding 95 degrees Fahrenheit and heat indices approaching 110 degrees, created life-threatening conditions for medically vulnerable populations, elderly residents without air conditioning, and households unable to refrigerate food or medications. At least 42 deaths were directly attributed to the storm and its aftermath in Louisiana, though public health researchers using excess mortality analysis suggested the actual death toll likely exceeded 100 when accounting for heat-related deaths during the extended blackout, carbon monoxide poisoning from improper generator use, and deaths among dialysis patients who could not access treatment facilities. The New Orleans City Council, responding to public outrage over the grid collapse, initially considered Energy's proposed Operation Gridiron plan that would have invested $1 billion in grid hardening, transmission upgrades, and underground wire deployment to improve resilience against future hurricanes, but ultimately rejected the plan's original scope due to the proposed $12 monthly increase in customer bills, approving instead a modified version with reduced investment levels and a cheaper price tag that critics argued would prove inadequate during the next major storm. Louisiana's grid vulnerability carries national implications that extend far beyond state borders, because the state hosts a concentration of energy infrastructure that underpins American petroleum refining, natural gas processing, and petrochemical production, at scales unmatched elsewhere in the country. Louisiana operates 17 petroleum refineries with combined processing capacity exceeding 3 million barrels per day, representing nearly 20% of total United States refining capacity, and when those refineries lose power during hurricanes, the immediate impact cascades through national fuel markets, as gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel supplies tighten, and prices spike across multiple states. Hurricane Francine in September 2024 caused minor damage to 6 refineries in its path and temporarily disrupted production, demonstrating how even moderate storms can affect fuel availability. The state also serves as a critical hub for natural gas processing and distribution, with pipeline infrastructure that moves gas from Gulf of Mexico offshore production facilities to consumption markets throughout the eastern United States, meaning grid failures that disable compressor stations and processing facilities can create natural gas supply constraints that affect heating and power generation hundreds of miles away. The Port of South Louisiana ranks as the largest tonnage port in the Western Hemisphere, handling agricultural exports, petroleum products, and bulk commodities that connect American producers to global markets. And extended power outages that disable port operations ripple through international supply chains, affecting everything from grain exports to chemical shipments. Louisiana experienced 93% of its total power outages during heat season, according to recent analysis by Climate Central, reflecting the dual vulnerability to summer hurricanes and extreme heat events that stress grid infrastructure and spike cooling demand simultaneously. North Carolina has emerged as a grid vulnerability concern through a different pathway than the weather-driven infrastructure failures that plague Texas, California, and Louisiana, with the state's blackout risk profile shaped significantly by deliberate physical attacks on electrical infrastructure that expose the shocking ease with which motivated actors can disable substations and leave tens of thousands of people without power for extended periods. On December 3, 2022, unknown attackers opened fire on 2 Duke Energy substations in Moore County using high-powered rifles, causing extensive damage to critical electrical equipment and cutting power to 45,000 customers for 4 days during early winter temperatures that dropped into the 30s. Moore County Sheriff Ronnie Fields characterized the incident as an intentional and coordinated attack, though investigators never publicly identified suspects or established a clear motive despite extensive investigation involving federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. The attack demonstrated a fundamental vulnerability in American electrical infrastructure. Substations that serve as critical nodes in power distribution networks are largely undefended, typically protected by nothing more than chain-link fencing that provides zero protection against rifle fire, and the specialized transformers and switchgear housed in these facilities can take weeks or months to replace if destroyed, because they are custom manufactured with long lead times and limited domestic production capacity. Duke Energy restored power within 4 days in the Moore County case, but only because the damaged equipment could be repaired rather than requiring full replacement, and because mobile backup equipment could be deployed to bypass damaged components, solutions that would not work if attacks occurred simultaneously at multiple substations across a region, or if attackers used explosives or incendiary devices that completely destroyed equipment rather than merely damaging it. The Department of Energy classified the targeted Moore County substations as low-impact facilities not believed critical to wider grid stability, which meant they operated under less stringent physical security requirements than high-impact substations serving major metropolitan areas or critical infrastructure. But the attack prompted a nationwide reassessment of substation vulnerability and security standards. Duke Energy operates more than 2,000 substations across the Carolinas alone, and the company acknowledged after the Moore County attack that it was evaluating physical security improvements across its entire footprint, including enhanced barriers, electronic monitoring systems, and mobile backup equipment pre-positioning, though the utility declined to provide specifics about security measures for obvious operational security reasons. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which regulates interstate electricity transmission, has authority to mandate physical security standards for high-impact substations, but does not regulate the thousands of distribution-level facilities like those attacked in Moore County, creating a regulatory gap where lower-tier infrastructure remains vulnerable to attacks that can nonetheless cause significant local disruption. If this sounds like something you're finding valuable, I need you to show your support by hitting the like button on this video, subscribing to the channel, and activating the notification bell so you do not miss future content. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from, your city and your country, because understanding where viewers are located helps me tailor content to the specific threats and preparedness challenges facing different regions. Beyond the immediate security threat posed by physical attacks, North Carolina faces grid reliability pressures similar to other southeastern states, experiencing rapid population growth, aggressive coal plant retirements without adequate replacement dispatchable generation, and transmission capacity constraints that limit power imports during high demand periods. The state's population grew by nearly 1 million residents between 2010 and 2020, with growth concentrated in the Charlotte metropolitan area, the Research Triangle region around Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and coastal counties that are simultaneously vulnerable to hurricane impacts. Duke Energy, which provides electricity to most of North Carolina, has retired multiple coal-fired power plants in recent years in response to environmental regulations and renewable energy mandates, reducing the state's baseload generating capacity while adding solar and wind resources that provide intermittent rather than dispatchable power. The transition creates operational challenges during periods when renewable generation is low due to weather conditions, cloudy days with little wind, and demand is high, forcing grid operators to rely on natural gas plants and power imports from neighboring states to maintain reliability. North Carolina hosts significant military installations, including Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, which is the largest military installation in the world by population, with more than 50,000 active duty personnel, as well as Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune and Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point, making grid reliability in the state a national security concern because extended blackouts affecting these installations could compromise military readiness and training operations. The convergence of physical security vulnerabilities, baseload generation retirements, population growth, and military installation concentration positions North Carolina as a state where grid failures, whether caused by attacks, extreme weather, or inadequate generating capacity, could trigger consequences that extend far beyond regional electricity markets. Massachusetts and the broader New England region present perhaps the most structurally dangerous grid vulnerability scenario in the entire United States. A situation rooted in deliberate energy policy choices that have systematically dismantled reliable baseload generation capacity while simultaneously blocking new natural gas pipeline construction, creating an energy supply crisis where the region literally cannot access sufficient fuel to keep power plants running during extended periods of extreme cold weather. The region has shut down multiple nuclear power plants, including Vermont Yankee, Pilgrim Nuclear Station in Massachusetts, and Indian Point in New York City just outside the New England footprint, eliminating thousands of megawatts of carbon-free baseload generation that operated continuously regardless of weather conditions. Simultaneously, environmental opposition has blocked proposed natural gas pipeline projects, including the Access Northeast Pipeline and the Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline, that would have increased the region's capacity to import natural gas from the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, leaving New England dependent on existing pipeline infrastructure that reaches maximum capacity during cold weather when both heating demand and power generation demand spike simultaneously. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation and the Northeast Power Coordinating Council have issued repeated warnings that the region faces severe threats to reliability during